Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle from WeAreSC.com. We have the usual crew. It's been 3 weeks since Lincoln Riley and D'Anton Lynn were asked about the rumors, then all over the internet, about D'Anton Lynn going back to his alma mater and becoming the defense coordinator at Penn State. That move was announced 18 days ago. As we sit here on Tuesday morning, at 9:49 a.m. Pacific time. We're pretty sure what's going to happen. It has not been officially announced. By the time you watch this, I'm quite sure it has been. So we are going to talk about USC's defensive coordinator search and what we think is almost certainly what the announcement will be imminently. Probably we'll have breaking news like Walter Cronkite used to be able to give you. That's probably going to happen at some point during this show. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the national title game last night. It's not so much the play-by-play, but what lessons we take from Curt Cignetti and Indiana doing the impossible. And that's probably enough to keep us all occupied. So, fellas, let's start with this. When Lincoln Riley first started talking about filling this opening or potentially filling this opening, his position was things have changed dramatically in the last 2 years. This is a much different job than it was when he hired D'Anton Lynn, and that everybody and his brother wanted a piece of this job. Right? All kinds of phone calls coming in, and so I guess it just took Lincoln Riley 3 weeks to listen to all the voicemails so he could make a decision. I want to start with this because we're all pretty sure that at some point today it will be announced that Gary Patterson is a new defensive coordinator at USC, and that Mike Eckler will be a special teams coach and probably will be at least a linebacker coach. I don't know if he's going to be the only linebacker coach. There are a couple of other things that I think we know because that's what all the relevant sources seem to say. Although I'll admit that I don't have any firsthand knowledge. I get all my news from everybody else. Part of what Lincoln Riley wanted in this search is he wanted somebody who was willing to take on the existing assistant coaches. That seems to be important. Now, we don't know yet whether all of them will return or whether the bulk of them will return, but it seems pretty clear at this point that if Gary Patterson is hired, he's not cleaning house by firing all those guys. And so I want to start with the process side of this because my question for the group is, if you're Lincoln Riley and you're looking to replace D'Anton Lynn, do you make holding on to the current assistant coaches a key job requirement that everybody else has to sign up to, knowing that defensive coordinators are going to say, all right, I like to have people who know my defense and I like to have people I trust because I'm basing my career on these people and their ability to do the job. So let's start with this. Mark Culkin, if you're Lincoln Riley and you have 3 weeks to make this decision, is that one of the key things in your mind that I need somebody who is willing to work with my existing staff because I want to keep
them? If I'm Lincoln Riley,
yeah,
I think that's what he knows. So I would have to agree with you. However, I'm not Lincoln Riley. And if I'm hiring somebody who's going to be in charge of my offense or in charge of this or the defense in this case, I want that chef in that kitchen to be able to bring his own ingredients. And I'm not talking about the players, the recruits, all that's taken care of. That's besides the point. But it's normal for a coordinator to want to have a say in who is going to be one of his sous chefs type of thing. And Lincoln Riley kind of limited his pool of applicants by saying, no, 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 no. We want to keep Coach Haney. We want to keep Coach Doug Belk, Trovon Reed, Rob Ryan. These guys understand what we're trying to do. We want to keep that continuity going. From that point, I get it. But at the same time, we've been having these conversations on the WeAreSC message board. Did we see the improvement and development from year one into year two as far as taking that next step, or did they just kind of flatline? So are you keeping the same people around because you want to make sure the players don't revolt and leave, and that's why we're waiting until after the transfer portal closes? Or is that because this is the best way to go about doing this?
Well, look, this is, and so, we talked a little bit about this last week, and I think Greg and I both expressed some concern
Mm.
about some members of the existing staff. But Eric, I want to be fair to Lincoln Riley. The truth is that he's hiring assistants in a time of college football that's very different from what college football was like even 5, 10 years ago. There was a time when guys commit to the program. If they want to leave, they pay a heavy price.
Yeah.
I mean, most of the time, if you wanted to transfer in conference, you're sitting out 2 years. You want to transfer outside of conference, you still have to sit out a year. And that was a pretty significant issue. Now you have essentially unlimited free agency. I'm not even sure it's bound by the rules of the transfer portal at this point, and you always have people offering you checks. If you're Lincoln Riley, you look at it and say, we just put in a ton of work and a ton of money in order to bring in the best recruiting class that USC has had in a very long time and the best recruiting class in the country. How do I risk that by letting go of assistant coaches that these guys came to play for? I mean, even if we disagree with this job criteria, it's not crazy, is it?
It's not crazy. I see it as, the ladder you want to be on, right? Is it better to be at the bottom of a ladder you want to be on or halfway up the ladder that you don't want to be on? Like if it doesn't work, if it doesn't mesh, right? If the new defensive coordinator doesn't mesh with the coaches that you have and you put out a poor defense this year, they're all gone next year anyway, right? So it didn't matter. Like you need to coach very, very well. We'll talk about Indiana and sort of what they did and all that sort of stuff. You need to coach at an extremely high level and get the best out of the players. If you put a collection of coaches out there that can't do that, I don't care what the rankings are of the guys or how good they are or whatever, you're not going to get the best out of them. So that's the risk, I think. I don't think the risk is, oh, we're gonna lose this guy, we're gonna lose this guy. I still think even with the new situation of college football and how players can leave and all of that stuff, you look at the history of USC's rosters forever. Good coaches can win with the players on that team at that point, right? Like the worst years that USC's had, there's NFL guys there. You can coach that up if you know what you're doing and you're cohesive on both sides of the ball. So I'm still gonna go with I need the coaches to mesh well. And I'm not saying they can't. Maybe they got here and they talked it out and they're like, hey, this is going to work great. You can do this really well. I really like this. This is going to fit. But I don't think I still, even though, yes, players have way more power than they've had, they can pick up and go, they can do all that stuff. I still don't think that you let them call the shots. And I'm not saying that they did here, but I don't think you bend over backwards to, oh, we have to make it easier or better on the players and give them everything that they want when the end result potentially is a worse product on the field because nobody's going to sign up for that anyway if you don't coach well and you don't win games.
Yeah. Look, let's be very clear about something. The players almost never know anything. They know their coach and they like their coach. They don't know much. There's a reason that we don't let 18-year-olds make major decisions for your normal. If you have a normal Fortune 500 company, you don't have a bunch of 18-year-olds calling the shots. It would be absurd. And while it's true that USC's recruits, both the guys coming in this year and the guys that were recruited by this staff last year, while it's true that those guys have dramatically more athletic ability than I ever had, they know less football than I do. They just do. They don't know as much as, and they certainly know less than Chad Bowden and Jen Cohen and Lincoln Riley. The idea that they should call the shots is in fact absurd. But having a coach that's a fantastic recruiter is very useful. Even in the day of NIL has changed the balance a little bit because even a mediocre coach looks pretty appealing when he walks up with a wheelbarrow full of cash. But it still matters. Here's my issue, Greg. My issue is that if You can have disputes about why various position groups underperformed last year in USC's defense. And if you go to our message board, you'll see people arguing about it. And I get in the mix and I argue about it with them, and we have a good time with it. If Nick Saban said, this is an excellent defensive staff, I don't want to lose any of these guys, then most rational people would say, okay, well, they didn't, their position groups didn't play as well as I expected last year. But if Nick Saban says these guys are elite, these guys are elite, and you'd shut up about it because he's earned that. Greg, Lincoln Riley has not earned that when it comes to defensive staff. And one of the things I looked up the other day was what he was talking about after that first season at USC, talking about retaining Alex Grinch. Listen to this. Here's a quote from Lincoln Riley in January of 23. I know what he's made of. I just do. I know what's getting ready to happen defensively. And so I just have a confidence and a belief there, not just in Alex, but the other guys in the room. This is right before USC gave up 42 points a game. So I think the problem USC fans have is they simply don't trust Lincoln Riley to get it right. And when Lincoln Riley says, this is a really excellent group of assistants, we have to hold on to them, we say, yeah, but it was only 2 years ago that you were telling us that about Alex Grinch, which we all knew was insane at the time it came out of your mouth, and we were proven right. So the problem, Greg, right, is that Lincoln Riley just has a credibility problem here, doesn't he?
Big time. Big time. I've been saying this both in the huddle, in my column. The problem is when you say something, you're going to be held accountable for it. If you say, I just hired a great defense coordinator and he's great, applause and standing ovation. But when you say, this guy's really great, people are going to say, well, you thought that Alex Grinch was really great. And, Anton Lynn only lasted 2 years. He made progress, but the bottom line is here we are. And if they do hire, Gary Patterson, it makes, for me, this is my interpretation. Others may take exception to what I say. It means nothing to me what Lincoln Riley is going to say, because I've heard plenty of what Lincoln Riley has said. And you brought up the point of credibility. He has to do things that turn out what he says. And he is not a defensive expert. I think to take into consideration is if they do hire Gary Patterson, which it looks like that's a real strong possibility, how much was it that Lincoln Riley said, let's hire Gary Patterson, which I think he probably said, okay. But he also had to get Jen Cohen, and he had to get really Chad Bowden to support that, because if it doesn't work out, okay, Patterson has not coached, since 2020, something in that area, yeah?
He's had 4 seasons off.
Yeah. And you know what? I don't get overly concerned in some ways to say that, in 4 years you lost everything you know. I mean, a lot of people say Hall of Fame coach, but he's got a situation where he's got to get his assistant coaches. I understand if they all come back. I have no problem with it per se. I don't think all of them will come back, but I think that there'll be maybe at least one that I think could change, especially if Eckler comes in and they make the official announcement. I think he will be coaching linebackers. I remember when he was coaching linebackers at SC. But, one of the things about a head coach is when he says something, you don't want people to sit there and just roll their eyes, because I'll tell you what, the players know too. I believe the players do know what's going on, and I'll tell you why I believe that is because they have, if just a couple of them, 2 or 3 of them go on social media and say, this is who I want. Am I so naive to believe that there aren't others that don't go on social media that are aware of this person teammate who's gone on social media and said things? So there is that situation.
Well, let's do this. Let's put aside then for a second the process, because Look, I'll be completely frank. I don't trust Lincoln Riley's process here because I don't necessarily trust Lincoln Riley's decision making. And you can take that or leave it. I don't really care. I feel pretty comfortable saying it at this point. But let's talk about Gary Patterson as a defensive coordinator candidate. Because you're going to have a lot of USC fans that don't like it. They don't like it because he's been out of coaching for 4 years. And his last 4 years when he was head coach at TCU really fell off pretty dramatically. So that's 8 years since this guy's been at the top of the game. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But let's also say this. It's hard to imagine Lincoln Riley hiring a defensive coordinator that has a better resume as a defensive coach than Gary Patterson. I mean, I was excited about Pete Kwiatkowski because he's put a lot of really good defenses on the field. Pete Kwiatkowski does not have as good a resume as Gary Patterson does. Gary Patterson had 5 times TCU #1 in the nation in total defense. As a major player, and they finished in the top 10 11 out of 16 years. That's wild stuff. Gary Patterson is in the Hall of Fame, in the College Football Hall of Fame, because he was at one time an extraordinary football coach. He was an innovator with his 4-2-5 defense. He breaks up the secondary from the front. He breaks up the secondary into 2 pieces. He's doing things that other people hadn't been doing, and he was extraordinarily successful at that. So before we get into whether or not he's the right guy and whether he should have been hired, I just want to point out that this is a guy that has a resume that's more impressive than anybody else you're going to hire. He just does. The question is, what does he bring to the table in 2026? So, Mark, I think based on what I've seen you write that you might be a little bit skeptical here, but I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. If in fact it's Gary Patterson, what do you think of that?
So I'd rather be more cynical than skeptical, but I understand where you're coming from on this, Chris. Look, what he's bringing is we're keeping continuity going. Forget the coaching, forget the assistant coaches. What type of scheme does USC run? They run the 4-2-5, which Gary Patterson is. I don't want to call him the godfather, but he innovated it. He made it popular where programs across the country started to install it as their defensive system. So you're bringing in a guy who understands, the philosophy of that scheme. If he can come in and say, all right, you know what? You guys are doing this really well with it. I like this part of it. We're going to keep this, but let's just tweak this a little bit. Getting your defensive backs to be better tacklers. He's an aggressive type of coach. He likes to do a lot of blitzing. He likes to do a lot of corner blitzing. He likes to disguise his schemes a lot. So I think, yeah, you look at, well, he's been away from coaching for 4 or 5 years, whatever that number is. He's been an analyst at both Baylor and Texas for a year, so he hasn't been completely out of the loop. I don't think he's forgotten how to coach. I think the bigger question is, was he just, kind of sitting around collecting the paycheck that TCU was, scratching off every month or whatever, wait till that happened? Or was he waiting for a head coaching opportunity? Or was he just waiting for the perfect opportunity just to get back into coaching? Because apparently he's wanted to be doing this for a couple of years now.
By all accounts, the guy's a
The right-
football junkie, right? Who sits around watching games, diagramming stuff. So it's not like he's been away from football and now he has to relearn stuff.
Right. He's not walking into a system or to a place where he just has to start over fresh and rebuild from the ground on up. At this point, he's kind of bought, so to speak, a really nice house, and it's just a little bit of a fixer-upper. He's got to invest some more time into patching up those holes, making sure the electricity is wired correctly, that type of stuff.
So, Eric, as Mark mentioned, Gary Patterson is a master of the 4-2-5, right? In the same way that Pete Carroll was a master of the Tampa 2 defense. He is somebody who has coached it for a very long time, very successfully, innovated from it. and his ideas ended up making their way through college football and into the NFL because he was one of the primary guys saying, if you want to stop the spread, you want to get more speed on the field, here's how you're going to do it, and then you need to be able to attack in ways that are unexpected. And he figured that stuff out and did extraordinarily well. So if you want to run the 4-2-5 and you want to run it with somebody who knows what they're doing, it's hard to find somebody who knows more about this type of defense than Gary Patterson. The question is, well, let me ask you, what are the questions? The guy's 65, has been out of coaching for 4 years. He wasn't successful in his last 4 years at TCU. So you're not necessarily getting prime Gary Patterson, or maybe you are. What are the worries when you hire Gary Patterson, despite his resume at this point?
The worries are the time off. I mean, that's the biggest one, is how have things changed? I don't totally buy into the Big Ten is this and the Big 12 is this and the SEC is this. Like, offense is offense throughout the country. The best offenses, a lot of them look the same at this point. Similar enough, big time playmakers. You got to defend the run, you got to defend the pass. There's RPO stuff everywhere. Like, it's again, the good running teams in the Big Ten. Oregon can run it. Indiana can run it. Ohio State can run it. Those guys can all throw it too. It's not, you're not worried about a Stanford, oh, they're going to bring out 4 tight ends and just run the ball down the field against us. Those are not the better offenses right now that scare you at this point. So I'm not totally worried about, oh, he's only seen Big 12 offenses and how's that going to translate. But his defense has been dissected so much for so long now. I wonder what else is there, right? I mean, it's always one of those things where stuff that works, if you run it to perfection, it's probably going to work. It's been a while since he's had to run that. And then how quickly do USC's players pick it up? Like we saw all last year, it just felt like they're not getting it. They're not getting it. Like whatever's being taught to them, they're not getting it right now. So I think there's kind of a question that I don't have any questions about his sort of mentality and all of that. A kind of hard ass coach who's told the game's passed him by and he's too old and then got time to sit on that and is coming back kind of angry. That feels fine. That feels fine to me. Like the way he's going to sort of attack this and all of that. It feels like USC could maybe use that after kind of some young wonderkin kind of coaching the last few years. So that's not so much worry, but just the kind of X's and O's and the game, and have you seen it and been in it, and watching it on TV, is that different than really dissecting it in a coach's office and that kind of stuff? But I don't doubt that he can sit there for 2 weeks and okay, this is what it's like. I get it now.
Mark, I'm going to go to Greg, but you want to make a point, so go
And,
ahead and make your point.
one of the things that Coach Gary Patterson was credited with was being able to evaluate lesser talent and develop it and get those guys into the NFL. This is going to be the most talented team he's ever coached in his career, if we're looking at it, from the star perspective. So can he take, his knowledge and experience and translate that to, all right, I'm not dealing with just 2 and 3 star guys anymore. I've got the Jakeem Stewarts, I've got the Floyd Bucards, the Luke Wafels, the Jamion Winfields. What can he do with that type of, with that type of talent?
Yeah, look, Eric mentioned, that Patterson might be an angry old guy, and Greg, we know the value of being an angry old guy. I mean, that's what.
Thank you very much, Chris. Greatly appreciated. You can call me Gary P now.
Here's my question for you, Greg.
Sure.
We know that that football goes in cycles, right? Somebody will come up with an offense and everybody has to scramble to adjust to it. Somebody comes up with a defense, everybody has to scramble to adjust to it. And usually when those systems sort of become the norm is when somebody finds a way to attack them and then everybody has to adjust again. is there a risk that Gary Patterson is an innovator whose innovation has sort of run its course, and that if USC wants to be at the cutting edge of college football, that maybe a 65-year-old guy that had most of his success 15 years ago ain't the right one?
It's always possible. I mean, John Robinson, the second time he came to SC, did not have the same success level, highest level that he had when he first was, coaching. Look at Pete Carroll. I mean, he got kind of fired out of football. Had to wait. Finally, got a chance to reassess himself, redo his goals, and look what he did at SC. He was, Hall of Fame coach, no doubt about it. Then he went to the NFL, and he was pretty successful there as well for, his time in Seattle. I think that the thing that Gary Patterson will do, in my opinion, is basically, I think what we've all talked about. The weaknesses at linebacker. Is he going to say, "Look, at guys, in order to have a great defense, we need to have our great players playing, and all this rotation stuff is not how I see it." And that's the type of decision making, from my perspective, that could change a lot of things on how they do business. Obviously, he's going to have something to say about the system, and he should. He's going to be held accountable for it. But you know what? Like anything else, I don't think he's going to forget about football because he's 65. I've been 65 some years ago, and I look about and I say to myself, well, could I be the same coach I was at 65 that I was at 35? No, I mean, there's an energy thing there, and I don't think he's going to sit there and do what a younger coach will do, but he will make decisions on how, I hate to use this term, the game is played on defense for USC. And that to me is as important as anything else. I mean, the guy's been a head coach, he's been successful. I remember when the wishbone, they're old enough to remember the wishbone, when it came in, nobody could stop it. They said, this is unstoppable. And it looked like maybe it was unstoppable. But then the longer people saw it, the more they adjusted to it. And then they moved on. I think Gary Patterson has had more than ample enough time to look at the offenses that are being run today and ask himself, oh, here's what I would do against this, and this is what I would do against that. So I think that he can make a big splash. I really do. And you know what? He's going to know whether SC can make tackles and all that sort of stuff, but it's going to be the decisions on who's going to play. How are we going to address some of this stuff? To me, whether he's 65 or he's 75, he can make this. He can make the right decisions, and I'm going to trust that he will make those initial decisions correctly.
I want to put the talent evaluation thing aside, because this is something that's going to come up later in our program. That's one of the things that Gary Patterson was known for. When you're coaching at TCU, the players in the Dallas-Fort Worth area who are elite get stolen away by Oklahoma and Texas, sometimes Texas A&M, sometimes Alabama, and you are not getting the 5-star elite players. You're getting the guys that are a level below that, and you have to be, if you're going to win at a place like that, you have to be really good at looking at high school players and saying, that guy's going to be good. And Gary Patterson found those guys and developed them. I want to talk about the importance of that in a little bit, because that's going to come up again. One of the other things that Patterson was known for is his scouting. Everybody talks about how meticulous, how maniacal he was at scouting opposing offenses. Whether he has the same energy to do that at 65 as he did at 45, I don't know. We'll see. But certainly the type of defense he runs has not run its course. It has become the norm in college football, and frankly the NFL, right? When I was playing in the early 90s in college, I was our nickelback as a freshman. I hardly ever played because you just weren't in that defense very often. But now you are all the time. So the defense hasn't run its course. It's still the norm, and somebody who understands that defense at a very at a very deep level is somebody who can certainly help you, and Gary Patterson is that. My question, I want to ask Eric his thoughts on this. My question, Eric, is what is Gary Patterson going to tolerate? My fundamental problem with D'Anton Lynn and his staff last year is they tolerated a whole bunch of crap. They tolerated edges who would come too far upfield and would set a soft edge and play lousy in the run game. They would tolerate linebackers who stood there and caught blocks 4 yards from the line of scrimmage. They would tolerate things that you can't tolerate. Every organization will have whatever the leadership tolerates. And USC tolerated stuff last year that make you a bad defense. And that's D'Anton Lynn's fault, and it's the fault of his assistant coaches. It's Lincoln Riley's fault. That's why the defense was bad. It wasn't that USC didn't have the talent to play better defense. That's stupid. They sure did. They thought they did coming into the year. They did. But they tolerated stuff they wouldn't. The question is whether Gary Patterson is somebody who's going to walk in and tolerate the same nonsense, because if he does, the defense won't improve. So you tell me, from what you know about Gary Patterson, is this a guy who's going to come in and say, I'm not going to tolerate that anymore from you guys, and if you do it, you're sitting down?
I mean, it's what it sounds like, right? It's what it sounds like. That's how he always coached. Now, again, with the time off and the way the game has changed over these last few years, I don't mean the game on the field. I mean the greater college football game and player retention and all that stuff. I think like Kurt Zanetti is not sitting there going, no, you do whatever you want. Like that's fine. I can't risk losing you. Like if you can show them that no, this is how we're gonna get the best out of you, I think you can do that. I think how quickly he can come in and sort of establish himself as that kind of coach, the faster you're gonna see results. But at this point, look, the biggest thing at this point, a Lincoln Riley coached team, it's hard to sit there in any offseason now and go, yeah, he's going to bring in a guy who's going to immediately fix the defense. Like it's going to be hard to, for the next 9 months, say definitively, yes, that defense is going to be locked in and much better. Now, what you are doing is bringing in someone where you can point to years and years and years and years of good production, development, guys going much higher in the NFL draft than you assume they would when they got there. So if you can get that kind of buy-in from assistant coaches, from players, from all of that, then I think he has a chance to elevate production in that way, because it is a guy who you're getting coached by a college football Hall of Fame coach, not a guy who's like on the trajectory to get there or whatever. He is in the Hall of Fame, and it's been 4 years out, but look, he was there at Texas, he was there at Baylor, like he's been involved. He's still still go bring him on shows to talk college football, all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think he's gonna. My assumption is he shows up and he gets the ear of a lot of those defensive players, and he's able to sit there and say, this is what it's going to look like for anyone who's actually on the field this year.
Well, one of the other issues is how quickly he can teach this defense to young players, right? I mean,
The coaches too, right? I mean, top down on that defensive side.
yeah, no. If you have a defense where even the older guys didn't play fundamentally sound, you have to teach them. But most of the talent on this defensive roster is going to be first and second year players. The most talented guys are young. Gary Patterson coached his most successful years at a time when players would sit on the bench for 3 years and there was nothing they could do about it. There are systems that players that take a long time to pick up. There was, when the West Coast offense was a big deal in the NFL and college football, 15, 20, 25 years ago, there were a lot of coaches who knew the West Coast offense and they would go somewhere, but the players couldn't pick it up fast enough. It was too complicated for college players who were young and didn't have the experience. And yes, you have a guy in the NFL that's been playing, that's been a pro quarterback for 8 years. He knows what to do with the ball, and the offense works. But I think you saw a bunch of guys that they would go somewhere and they had a first or second year quarterback and it didn't work. But when the guy was a fifth year senior, all of a sudden the offense would take off. I'm not saying Gary Patterson's version of the 4-2-5 is like that, but I'm also not saying it's not. I don't know how long it takes to teach guys this offense, but I know that he's going to have a bunch of young dudes figure it out in a hurry for USC to have success. Otherwise, they're going to have a bunch of confused defensive players playing against Indiana and Oregon and Ohio State, and a bunch of other teams who will whack you if you are not ready to go.
Don't you just want from your younger players just to be aggressive? As long as they have the basic understanding of what the scheme is, isn't that what they talked about for
Well, no, I
5 years?
want my younger players to be aggressive, yes, but I also want them to do their
As long
assignment.
as they're going 100%, I don't care if they make mistakes. Just go 100%. I mean, that was kind of the.
I mean, look, Mark, I played corner, and there were a couple of times when I went 100%, and a guy ran right behind me for a touchdown. And I don't know that that's what we're looking for here. So yeah, I want my
That's been installed. That's been the theme for the last couple of years.
yeah. I'm saying that's yes. I want my guys to play aggressively, and part of playing aggressively though is understanding your assignment at a deep level, so you don't have to think about it anymore. And I just don't know. I'm not suggesting Patterson can't teach the guys his system very quickly, especially because it is somewhat related, I suspect, to what Dan Lynn was doing. I'm just saying that is at least a question mark in my mind, because in order to play well, you have to be able to play fast and you have to be able to understand what you're doing. And USC looked like they had a bunch of dudes last year who didn't really understand what they were supposed to be doing. And the rumors are that Dan Lynn thinks it's because they weren't smart enough. I think if you're a football coach, you got the guys you got, you better teach them something they can understand. And if you don't, that's on you. And if you need to simplify things, you simplify things. You don't get to say, well, my players aren't smart enough to run my really great system. We'll see what Patterson can do with that, but he's going to have to teach guys who you're going to have to get production from Sermons and Winfield and Wayful. You're going to have to get a whole lot of production from guys like Jakeem Stewart. You're going to have to teach young guys to play in a hurry. And so we'll see whether he can do that. I hope he can. If he can,
I'm not so worried. I'm not honestly, I'm not so worried about that. I think the first thing that the Patterson has to do is to teach his assistant coaches the philosophy he wants to see them inject into these players. He's going to address the defensive groupings, and they're going to say, "Did you know that Gary is Hall of Fame?" Da, 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 and build up his credibility. So the players are going to listen. I don't know how many of them really know who Gary Patterson was or at what level he was perceived to be as a coach, but he'll first have a meeting with those coaches. He'll see what their philosophy is and what they've been teaching and how he wants to change it. He'll explain why he wants to change it, and that's what he's going to see. He's not going to be participating in drills, at length, but he'll be able to go from one group to another group to see what's being taught. And I think that, I agree. You got to start off with talent, and they have to play hard, and they have to play as though it's, every game. It's hard to say this, but, every down is, fourth and goal at the one. And you have to know what you're doing and ready to play. And, if he can instill that and say, look, you all got a chance to play last year, but in order for us to get to the playoffs, we can't do that. We have to sit there and take just the guys that are going to do what we want. And if you don't do what we want, then you're not going to be part of the process. Because in the end, if things don't go well, I can guarantee you that we will probably sit there and say on the show in the fall, well, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, or they're not accomplishing what they needed to accomplish. And no way does Gary Patterson want to be held up and being questioned about his ability.
yeah, well, look, one of the things that I'm pretty sure is going to happen is Gary Patterson is going to watch film from last year's games. And he's going to have some very difficult conversations with some of those remaining assistant coaches. I mean,
Absolutely.
if I'm watching guys playing undisciplined the way that defense did, and I'm sitting down with that coach for that position group, I'm going to have some hard questions, and I'm going to want to hold that guy accountable. Gary Patterson wants to be successful. He didn't come back to fail. And if he's having assistant coaches given to him that he didn't select, I think he's going to want to know why were these guys not playing fundamentally sound in these ways, and why were they not playing hard on some of these plays, right? Why are you allowing guys to jog on 3rd and 20 in overtime, for crying out loud? I think he's going to have some questions. Whether or not he breaks through and holds the defensive assistants accountable such that they hold their players accountable, we're going to find out. We're probably not in September, because we're not going to play anybody worth anything in September. But by October, we'll know. All right, I want to shift focus a little bit. We're going to talk about some of the same concepts. I want to talk, Indiana obviously finished really an incredible Cinderella season. Not so much because they weren't expected to be great before the season started. Everybody knew they were going to be good this year, but because 2 years ago, the idea that Indiana would go 16-0 and blow out Oregon and blow out Alabama and win the national title would have been crazy talk, right? No, I mean, that was just happening. So I want to talk about this. What lessons do we take from the rapid rise and the national title that Curt Cignetti brought to Indiana? Eric, I want to start with you. What lessons do we take from what we just saw?
I don't know. I don't know that there's a lot of new lessons. Like, be good up front on both sides. And I mean great. I mean be great. Miami was great up front both sides. Indiana was great up front both sides. If you want to win, you had better be great up front on both sides. You got to make plays, you got to have a quarterback, all of that sort of stuff. I don't I can circle around if we want to talk how they got built and recruiting and NIL and all that sort of stuff. I got thoughts on that too, but I think at the end of the day, Indiana put a great offensive line together, a great defensive front seven. They had playmakers out on the edge, and it's a great roster at this point. However it got built, however it got put together, that's how you win. That's how you win. You're the toughest team along both lines of scrimmage.
If you go back 4 or 5 years and you show that group of players to the coaches who were recruiting high school players, nobody would have said that's a great roster, right? Nobody would have said that. So my question
based on their ranking coming out here, or if they watched that game.
No,
See what I'm saying? If you watch that game, you go, man, all those guys can play. I'll take all those guys.
No, agreed. But 4 or 5 years ago, and they're coming out of high school, or in some cases 6 years ago or more,
right.
Nobody looks at that Indiana roster and says, that's a great roster. Now, the Ohio State roster this year, yep, but not the Indiana roster. And so one question is, how in the world did they come up with a great roster having a bunch of dudes that most teams like USC did not want? Mark?
So there's the intangible that you cannot quantify. That is their attitude. It's the way they play the game. I mean, we can talk about how they constructed the roster, and half of that was the old James Madison University program they just brought over, their familiarity with each other. We talk about the continuity all the time. But when you watch that team play, forget their playmakers, forget who they are up front and on both sides of the ball. Just watch the attitude they play with. Every play, they are winning every single repetition, whether it's a running back falling forward and getting an extra 2 yards, whether it's the quarterback putting his hand on the ground and diving towards the end zone goal line, whether it's the wide receiver getting yards after contact, whether it's their undersized defensive linemen taking on a mammoth offensive line and using their speed and agility to blow up plays. For me, Indiana, it's all about attitude. Yeah, they've got some good players, some solid pieces, but I don't know, can you teach that type of attitude? Because the entire team bought in. I mean, you look at their coach, Curt Cignetti, He is probably 180 degrees from Pete Carroll when it comes to energy and that type of stuff. But you watch him coach and you're saying, that's a Pete Carroll coach team right there.
Yeah, it's an interesting question whether you teach that or whether you can find it. And maybe Greg, let's start with that. The most important thing I want from a coach is that he gets the absolute most he can get out of his players. Now, some of those guys, like Mendoza, is going to go on to be an excellent NFL quarterback. There's no doubt in my mind. This is a guy who is smart and tough. He can make the throws. But I don't know that most of that roster is going to go on to have 10-year NFL careers. Curt Cignetti gets the absolute most out of his guys, right? So how does that happen, Greg? Is he just good at finding guys that play hard? Does he teach it? Is it a combination? What's going on?
Well, I think he knows the type of character and that type of thing. I mean, a number of these players, came from James Madison when he came over, right? And obviously they knew him. He knew, they knew him. He knew them. And you, you can't bleed blood out of a rock. So I mean, they're just players that, like we saw it with SC last year. First half didn't play very good. Second half they played more meaningful. That's a mental thing. That's an emotional thing. I think what Cignetti is able to do is because he has great credibility. I mean, he's also the son of a coach, so he's got some of that in his system. Is he's able to sit there and get players to believe what he wants. He brought over assistants that believe in the system, and they were able to take players who probably wanted to win very bad. I mean, if you took off the Indiana uniforms and you put Alabama or USC in its prime, you go, well, of course, that's who they are. They're going to be great. But I agree with Cignetti when he say this was He was like he was trying to say, folks, this was Indiana. This really was Indiana, because when we think about Indiana, at least I do, growing up, it was always basketball, of course. I mean, I did see in the Rose Bowl the '67 Indiana team with Harry Gonzo and Eisenbarger and all those players that I remember. And SC, I think beat them like 14-3 or something like that. But I think what Cignetti did was, it doesn't matter how many All-Americans you have. I mean, that's obviously helpful, but he got the players to really, which is a stupid way of saying, play 110%. And they communicated. You could see what they were doing, and they hit. And uh, Eric said, they were physical on both sides of the line of scrimmage. They were the sum of the parts. And they had a fiery quarterback that had a lot of charisma, terribly when I say terribly, but not in a negative sense. You watch him on these post game interviews and stuff. I mean, he was electric. You could feel like, I could play in it on his, with his offense or his defense. And the whole thing was, it's about credibility to get players that already have it in their system. I was fortunate. I was at Edison High School when they won CIF 2 years in a row, large school division, 33, 34 games in a row. And the one thing that I saw, there were players that went to USC and Notre Dame and other places big time. But most of the team were great high school players that, were 6'2", 230-pound offensive tackles. Today, that would be, we don't even have guards that small. But what I learned was, it's the players together. I mean, I think one of the great things was the players would rat on other players if they did something like cut a class or didn't do what they're supposed to do. And the peer pressure within the team was so strong. It was magnificent to watch in a 4-year period. And the coaches were great. They were really great. And I said, this is how it's supposed to look, no matter what sport you're coaching. When it's like that, it's the best of the best.
Yeah, look, Cignetti took a program that had never done anything, right? They've largely been terrible every year for my lifetime. And within 2 years, built a culture that is the equal of anything that Nick Saban had ever built at Alabama, or or John McKay had built at USC, right? These are guys who take their responsibilities to their teammates and their coaches very seriously, and they played hard and they played disciplined. And that is, to be frank, not necessarily what we've seen at USC over the last 15 years. But he managed to do that. The other thing I would say about Cignetti is, and this gets us back to something we started before, Cignetti is a remarkable evaluator of talent, right? This is a guy who says, okay, these 13 guys at James Madison can take a step up and be excellent football players. But just recruiting to James Madison means that a lot of people didn't want him. And when he gets guys out of the portal, he doesn't miss. When we talk about Gary Patterson, one of the things that people always talk about was Patterson's ability to evaluate talent, to look at a guy and say, yeah, I know he's a low 3-star. I know Oklahoma and Texas didn't offer him. That guy's a football player. And let's be frank, USC's had some serious evaluation problems on their coaching staff the last couple of years. They strike out in the portal way too much. They dramatically overestimated what they had along the defensive front. They were talking up like this is going to be Udeze Patterson, Cody again, and it was the farthest thing from that. If nothing else, it will be nice to have Gary Patterson around because you may have somebody who actually is a pro evaluator. That's not to say that none of USC's coaches can do that. If Lincoln Riley says this guy's a good running back, I'm going to listen. Lincoln Riley doesn't miss with running backs. He doesn't. He doesn't often miss with quarterbacks or wide receivers. If you're talking about skill position talent offensively, Lincoln Riley's as good as anybody. I don't know who the defensive staff had last year that could do that. I don't know. I didn't see it. I saw a bunch of coaches who were talking up their talent and then putting on the field guys who don't know what they're doing and play mediocre at best. That's what we saw. I suspect that Gary Patterson will help us with that. Oh, Greg, go ahead.
One of the comments that I always think back to is when Coach Riley says, I'm going to get involved with the defense. I'm going to get over it. That isn't going to happen if it's Gary Patterson. Because, first of all, Lincoln Riley knows Gary Patterson. He obviously respects Gary Patterson. And I think we would all agree, all four of us, that the idea that Lincoln Riley is going to go and he's going to help the defense was a little bit over the top. Now, if it worked, then you'd go, well, he really did know what he was doing. But in this case, with a Patterson, it's really going to be all about Patterson because Lincoln Riley is at the 5th year of his 10-year term. And with a terribly brutal schedule, he's got to put all his faith in the people that he's bringing in.
Lincoln Riley doesn't want to be involved with the offense. I mean, one of the things he said, he was looking for a guy to be the CEO of the defense. I mean, he's looking for somebody to run that side of the ball and do it effectively. And he's hoping that somebody with Gary Patterson's experience, not just in coaching, right? Because Gary Patterson has a lot more experience than Dan Lynn did, obviously, but his experience is also in college football. Whereas Eric Henderson and Rob Ryan and Danton Lynn, the vast majority of their experience came in the pro game. And I think that matters. I think it's different teaching an 18-year-old who got by in high school just because he's bigger and faster than everybody else, and teaching a guy who's a 5th-year pro, right? Those are two very different coaching jobs. USC has brought in a defensive coordinator that, to the extent he is still the guy he was 10 years ago, we'll see, is a guy who knows how to teach college kids. He knows how to teach you to play football. So that's nice. Last thing, guys, because there is one part of this whole Indiana thing that bothers me. I wanted Indiana to win, right? If USC isn't going to win, I'd certainly rather be Indiana than Oregon or Miami or Ohio State or Georgia or any of those programs, right? I don't want that. But I wonder if one of the lessons that people take from this is that you need to have guys who are very old And the only way you're going to get guys who are very old and experienced is to do the heavy lifting out of the portal. And if that's the lesson people take, I think it only exacerbates some of the worst aspects of the current college football environment, which is you have a bunch of look. Miami's quarterbacks basically said he hasn't been to class in 2 years because he graduated 2 years ago, and he has some master's program that doesn't require him to show up anywhere. I don't know what kind of master's that is, but that's a little bit embarrassing. Guys shouldn't be playing college football for 6 or 7 years. That's stupid. And to the extent that the only way you can win in college football now is to raid everybody else's roster on a yearly basis, that's also stupid. I don't blame Curt Cignetti from doing it. Curt Cignetti inherited a disaster of a program and did what he had to do to win and did it very well. But all the things that are bad about college, despite the fact that this is a great Cinderella story, right? It's Hoosiers in real life, pun intended. Despite that, what Cignetti had to do in order to build that program, what other people are watching is saying, yeah, I need a bunch of guys who are 5th and 6th year players, and that means I need to go pull them out of the portal, and I need to figure out who the best players are and bring them here for a year or two. I got to say, guys, I hate that about college football. It's the worst thing about college football now. I don't blame Cignetti. He did what he had to do. But that's not the lesson I want everybody to learn from this, because it makes college football really difficult to enjoy.
I think we're not going to have to worry about the 6th-year player for much longer. I mean, the COVID thing has got to be pretty far back in our rearview mirror by now. So 5th-year players, I guess, are going to be the hot commodity. Look, if you can keep the core of your recruiting classes together for 2 to 3 years, then yeah, you kind of manipulate the system. Say, all right, let me go get that 5th-year guy from Indiana, that 5th-year guy from whomever, and plug them in. And I think that's where some of the disappointment is coming from with USC fans is USC went all in these last couple of years with recruiting, especially the 2026 class, invested heavily into it, and then took the complete opposite approach with the transfer portal this season. And it just seems like there was no continuity with the plan. And that's what I think has everybody trying to, doing this. What's going on?
Well, there might be continuity with the plan if what USC is thinking is that they have to win in 2027, not 2026. But
again, that still makes no sense. Why bring back Jade Mayaba and not start playing your younger quarterbacks who are going to be around in 2027?
Yeah, well, my bigger problem is that I think if USC gets 4 players out of the portal, USC is in the playoff next year. USC didn't get those 4 players. That's my problem, is that it was not a complete overhaul of the type that Curt Cignetti found when he showed up at Indiana. USC had to get a linebacker or 2. They had to. They had to get, I think, somebody to come off the edge that you can depend on causing problems for opposing offenses. They had, I mean, you find 4 stars out of the portal at key positions, and you look at this USC football team, you say, despite the schedule, I think they can go 10-2. Without doing that, I don't look at the schedule and say 10-2. I look at the schedule and say 8-4. And that's what I think is frustrating, for me at least.
It's tough because if you go back, USC went to what would have been the college football playoff, right? If there's 12 teams in 2022, USC is one of those teams and in the playoff as it stands now. And what they did there was they hit in the transfer portal, right? I mean, one gigantic one, and then a few others that really helped. And the lesson from 2023, apparently, right, was we tried to go back to the portal, we missed a ton, we can't do that, right? It was a couple years of that we missed. We're not going to do that. We're going to go this other thing. And every team that's won and been to the playoffs and done it well, the answer is no, you just have to do it right. You just have to do the portal correctly. And then that's how you get there. And so USC is going a different way than anybody this year. Like they're just deciding, no, we're not going to do what has proven right. And be correct in the portal because they've shown that for a few years now they haven't been right more than wrong on those guys. And so that's when it's like next year's offseason is the interesting one, right? Can you keep if you're going all in with those young players, you can't lose, the bottom half of them that are going to end up being those fourth year, fifth year guys that go win a championship for somebody else because now they got playing experience somewhere else and that sort of thing. So it does become like 26 is it's and we've got tons of time to talk about this, but this season becomes interesting if you're going all in on young players. And it's not all in, right? Like Wayman Jordan comes back. That's a big veteran like you brought back a lot of veteran guys. Elijah Page. Like these are people, Jaden Mayava, where the USC could have said, no, we're gonna go young everywhere, but you still brought back enough veterans to think, okay, we're trying to win this year. But yeah, it hasn't been let's go all in on young players across the country. It's hey, we need to push ourselves over the top with transfer portal players and USC's guys. There's the potential for some Indiana type guys, right? Where it's, yeah, you've played a ton at these Power Four programs. We're going to bring you in and do this, but it doesn't feel right now like there were enough, true difference makers like what Indiana's James Madison guys who came over ended up being. But Indiana did a good job of that. Like if you go back and look, recruiting classes, and this is at Alabama and anywhere that's had a ton of success. USC is the same thing. Like your 5 stars being 5 stars, elite guys, yeah, that's huge. But you win consistently and you win championships on being right more often than not on your 3 star developmental guys to fill that out. What Indiana did a really good job of is they let those guys develop other places and then they grabbed him, right? Pat Coogan ends up being the MVP of the Rose Bowl. He was a 3 star guy coming out of Notre Dame. Yeah, go play there, get a bunch of time, then we bring you over and we kind of reap all the rewards of that time that you spent somewhere else. So when you can collect everybody else's 3 star developmental successes in the portal, because there's a ton of them out there. You just have to be right on them. And that's where you go back to the eye for talent, the development, all of that, where he's just a step above anybody else out there right now. And I think that's what we showed is like, yeah, you can do that, but you'd better be right. And right now, there aren't a whole lot of guys that are anywhere close to him in terms of the number of those players that they're right on.
And here's the thing, though, Eric, and it goes back to what I was just saying. They want to major in the high schools, minor in the portal. They've got the roster to the point where, okay, we can minor in the portal in the 2026 cycle, but they didn't do it the right way. They didn't go grab those 3 star developmental guys who've been around for 3, 4 years at somewhere else and brought them in. This was the year, if you want to minor in the portal, you don't need a lot of pieces. Go spend the money you need for those individual pieces, kind of like what Texas Tech did. But for whatever reason, because they got burned in the last couple of years, spending all the money and getting no return on the investment, whatever the case, again, the plan doesn't seem to be going according to plan.
Right. This
is
not 2022. This is not 2022 where USC has to bring in 15 starters.
Right.
You need 5. You need 5 guys who can step in and make an impact at positions where you simply don't have what you need. And I thought they would do it this offseason. And if they didn't have enough money, don't bring in a class of 35, bring in a class of 25, and then go bring in the 5 dudes you need to win this year. It was a mistake not to do that. And we're going to get beat up. We're going to get beat up by the people who watch this. Are going to tell us that all these guys who played last year, they got all these reps, are going to be great. No, they're not. And I'm not going to call out their names because I don't like to do that unless I have to. But there are guys who got a lot of snaps last year who are bad football players. And now USC is going to rely on those guys to become good football players. And it's not going to happen. And that was a mistake. And I don't know why they made that mistake when everybody else in the country including teams that recruit really well out of high school, like Oregon and Ohio State. What do Oregon and Ohio State do? They go and supplement their roster with a handful of guys every year who can step in and make an impact. And there are impact dudes in that roster that USC did not go after, presumably because they don't have the money. And as a result, USC will win 8 games next year instead of 10. That's what's going to happen. That's what's going to happen. And it didn't have to happen. That was foolishness. And I think Eric's right. I think Lincoln Riley took the wrong lesson from the problems they had in the transfer portal. The problem is not the transfer portal, Lincoln. You struck out on 3 offensive linemen in 2023. You did. That's not because the portal doesn't work. It's because you struck out, probably because you decided to make all those guys switch up their positions for reasons that are a mystery to me to this day. But that's, if you look, Greg, the great college football coaches, going back to John McKay back in the old days, McKay was known as a guy who could evaluate football players. He would look at a guy and say, I know what that guy can be, and I know the position he's going to be in. And more often than not, McKay would nail it. Right?
All the time. His first thing was, he's in charge. Okay. This is what we're all going to do. His second thing was he brought in coaches and he taught them what he wanted them to teach them. And he brought in great coaches. If you look at their careers after SC, a lot of them were NFL head coaches. I mean, it was incredible. He kept the raw group like Marv Goo, Dave Levy, for those that are old enough, mighty old enough to remember those names. Okay, he kept them. You know what? John Robinson got a number of those assistant coaches as well. I would say that when it comes right down to it, Lincoln Riley is going to have to deal with his Rolodex, who he could get, who he was able to convince. Did he teach him what he wants them to learn, like McKay did, or like maybe Robinson did, or hire the right people to do it? And you know what? It's this as well as anybody, Chris, and you've been very successful in the world of being a lawyer. You know, Indiana was great because they were a team. And you know what? If you've been on a team or you played on a team or you've coached a team or your kid's been on a team that's a big winner, they all look the same. They are like one mind, one heartbeat. They all buy in. And, from the coaching down to the players, fan support. I'll just conclude with this. There is nothing in my mind that makes me not believe that with the right situation, with the right people, Pete Carroll proved it in his early career at SC. SC's as good as any of them. They just have made some big mistakes on who they hired as coaches or the coaches that hired their coaches. But if you hire the right people and you get the right players and they play as a team. See, I think the difference, people say, well, I'm old now, which is true. What's the difference between players when I was growing up or in my 20s, my 30s, and where I am today? When I was growing up, players would say, I want to go to USC and win the national title. And it was very believable because SC was doing it. Today, I get the impression that players say, I'll be there for 3 years and then it's on to the league. It's almost the league has been the big goal. And okay, I'll stay at SC for 3 years and then I'll go to the NFL. How about you do something at SC? Because that's why you're there. The NFL isn't going anywhere. Say I want to be at SC and really mean it. So we'll see how that comes about. I'm done.
All right, well, guys, let's wrap it up. And just so my position is clear on this, I'm actually not down on the Gary Patterson hire. I think that it's risky, and it's not a sure thing. But far be it from me to say that a guy who has that resume and that level of sustained success coaching defense can't step in and coach a defense next year. I mean, he may very well be the evaluator and the disciplinarian that USC needs, and I hope so. And then I'll be able to say, see, Lincoln Riley doesn't always get defense wrong, but then again, maybe next year I'll be saying, yep, Lincoln Riley always gets defense wrong. Guys, anything else we want to say before we close it out?
Well, the last thing on Patterson for me, an interesting thing is that he's talked about wanting to get back into coaching. And there's so to enter the College Football Hall of Fame, you have to be out of coaching for 3 years, or I think it's if you're 70, you can go in the next year. If you're 75 and active, you can go in while you're active. So the gap let him go into the Hall of Fame at this point in his career. What he's also talked about and not really been shy about is he is, I think it's 19, I think, wins away from 200 in his career. You don't get credit for wins as a coordinator. You get credit for wins as a head coach. So if he's coming back in with that number, how long are you here? Is there a sort of succession plan that's put in place at this point, or is USC looking for another one in a year or two for Lincoln Riley there? So again, it doesn't feel like this is a there were some names out there that you threw around where USC defensive coordinator feels like that guy would settle in there for 10 years, 12 years, whatever it ended up being. Uh, Gary Patterson feels like he's got still some potential for upward movement and some desire to become a head coach again.
That only happens if he kills it in the next year or two.
Got to do well.
Maybe...
So there's the trade, right? Yeah, if that happens for him, it's because they did well.
Here's the other thing, are these USC players that are currently on the roster and the ones who were just recruited, they weren't recruited by this guy. They weren't evaluated by this guy. Are they going to be able to accept his coaching style, the way he teaches, the way he speaks? And I'm not talking about, derogatory language. I'm talking about being, going from soft-spoken Dan Lynn to I'm kind of an ass kicker type of coach. Get used to it because you're going to feel my foot in your butt if you're not doing your job. Will the players be able to flip that switch and accept that type of personality?
Danton didn't do a lot of recruiting, so that there's if you want that discussion,
the personality type is
that discussion of the position coaches staying and familiarity, and like that goes all the way back to the beginning where we were talking about where it's still same voices kind of in the room and that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, yeah, he's not going to be Dan Lynn on the field. No.
When I was coaching high school basketball, I literally took over the freshman team 4 games into the season because the varsity head coach was like, Mark, the guy's not getting it done. I went in there. I was a completely opposite type of personality than what they were dealing with. I mean, there's a reason why I got the nickname Bobby Knight Jr. and not because of all the nefarious
chairs.
No, not because of those things, just because of the way it was structured. It's my way or the highway. Do it this way or get out. They went on to play in the championship game that year. So again, it's a matter of, can you change the culture from that small micro point of view?
Well, the players did not seem to respond the way they needed to Danton Lynn's personality last year. So I guess we'll see. I don't know, but we're going to find out by next week. Maybe we'll know what USC schedule is going to be next year, and we'll probably have a press conference to go through regarding the defensive coach hires. And so there'll be more to talk about, but that's all we're going to talk about today. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week. Until then, fight on, everybody.